I just listened to the one that's currently uploading, and I just thought I'd elaborate on some of it. So, something at one point I became aware of was that I was basically fighting to keep my issues. And so I realized when I was identifying, saying things like, I have Crohn's disease, I have fibro, I have degenerative disc disorder, all of those things, or even something like I have chronic pain. I was actually identifying with those things, which I can say them now with no impact because I don't believe those words coming out my mouth. But at the time I did. I used to think they were a part of me, and that was, I was basically allowing it to be a part of who I was, until I realized that essentially I was asking for more of the same. Because when we identify with the things that we don't want, we're not allowing ourselves to experience the things that we do want. So if we're needing to follow, say for example, the things that I was doing, I needed to follow certain diets at different times. I was identifying and giving my power away to those diets to have control over me, which was one of the reasons I got sick of it. I was like, I want to be able to eat what I want to eat when I want to eat it, and drink. And so now, because I went through it with all of the things that I was eating, and I intentionally ate things that I knew I had identified as them being what I used to refer them to was trigger foods. And so the more I ate them and the more I had reactions, the more I uncovered those stories and essentially deleted those limiting beliefs, which took time and effort and work to reprogram and choose different thoughts. And so for anyone who listens to Abraham Hicks, when they talk about creating our own resistance, that's what I was doing. I was throwing more resistance on my path. I didn't want to be having the experience, but I kept talking about the experience, which kept it active in my energy field, which for me, I'm glad I did, because then it allowed me to completely deconstruct it. I mean, I could have, some of what they talk about, I would personally refer to it as spiritual bypassing, which for some people, that is their best option. Like if you aren't at the point where you know how to reprogram the mind and you're kind of a passenger to the mind instead of controlling it, then it's probably a better option to spiritually bypass initially, kind of the way that I did it with finding carnivore diet that worked, and then eventually later, that was my path of least resistance, which was identifying with the external to change my internal to then change the external, which in some ways was a quicker but a longer path, and then in other ways it was a longer but quicker path. So it's, it's choosing whatever you want to accomplish. And so really paying attention to, one thing they talk about is momentum, which, for years and years I had identified with these illnesses. And so I had a lot of momentum going because, it was a deep-seated story that I kept identifying that I have these things, and, I kept that as my center point in my active in my energy field. And so it wasn't until I learned to start letting it go that then the issues started going away. But it is, when you've got that much momentum where you want to change the outcome, you sometimes have to go through and deconstruct the resistance and also slowly slow down the momentum. It really depends on where you're at with your own level of consciousness. So now, like, if something comes up, I can catch it and stop it straight away, but that's because I've essentially taught myself and trained myself how to do that. It's, I could start buying into someone else's story and then go, oh no, that's theirs, and then just straight away let it go. But that's because of where I'm at in my journey, and because I've been consciously aware that I've been consciously doing it for quite a while now. Whereas someone who's only just beginning to learn how to identify and change their own patterns and cycles, sometimes it is easier to identify with the external to then grow the internal power. But it's, we do have the free will to really choose our own adventure. So it's a matter of, choosing your own battles wisely and finding what your own path of least resistance is. And I mean, that's something I'm always learning with myself and other people when I interact with them, is, how far I can push them into their own better experiences. But it depends, you can you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So sometimes I just have to allow people the time and space to sometimes they need space to identify a bunch of resistance they're creating for themselves, and then sometimes they'll be open and ready, especially if they're unconsciously consuming things that are perpetuating the cycle. I'll usually let them go and figure it out on their own, because otherwise I'm just speaking and it's, falling on deaf ears. And the more you live in the present moment, the more you're aware of what in the past is affecting the present and is going to affect the future. So with whatever you're doing, understanding how you feel about what you're doing, and, is there any chatter in the back of the mind? Which for me, the only thing I'm focused on right now is putting these dots down and speaking whatever comes to mind. I don't have any other stories or other thoughts, because I've placed all of my attention on dotting and sharing this knowledge and wisdom. Hence if you really pay attention, you'll notice that as I'm placing the dot, the dots where I stop momentarily, the dot comes out better. It's all about attention and focus and what you're focusing on. So if you really want to, with shadow work, I did nothing but shadow work for a long time. So I had to sacrifice temporarily other things that I enjoyed while I was focusing on it, because I wanted to clean that up. So like if I was, it was something actually I learnt while I was dotting, that if I was trying to do intense shadow work while dotting, the dot work didn't come out nearly as nice as if I did the shadow work and then picked up the dotting. So it's, yeah, just the more you pay attention to what you're paying attention to is where you'll really start to understand yourself. And part of that was, part of the shadow work was realizing that essentially I didn't even know who I was, because I didn't even understand my emotions and, why I said or did the things I did. And, now I'm very aware of why I do what I do and say what I say. And I know that, it's quite crazy to look back at, years ago, seeing the trauma patterns, and especially now, like, because I've deleted the codependency program, now when people try and interact and create those codependent trauma bonds, it's actually repulsive. Um, so, looking back at my past, I can see how repulsive it was for people being on the receiving end back when I was codependent. And it is the most disgusting feeling. So, it's really identifying our own actions, behaviors, and, always looking at everything from both sides. I'm always the student and I'm always the teacher. There's, if I'd learnt everything, I would have taken an exit point. Um, yeah, and even, see, I'm torn right now. My higher self is assuring me that I'm going to go with it. Um, Essentially, all death is suicide, because you look at people who die from diseases, they've been ignoring their own inner guidance system. And so essentially, if you keep doing the same thing, thinking the same thing, shoving down emotions, all of the things that lead to disease, if you keep doing it, essentially it is, it is a form of suicide. Or even making a choice knowing that it's not going to end well, but doing it anyway. When we get those hunches not to, especially when there's a whole bunch of resistance, it's like if someone rings you, for example, and they want you to go and do something, but then everything is just falling apart, that's your inner guidance system saying, don't go and do it. There's a reason, like you could be going to have a car accident or whatever. It's, our higher self knows everything, all space, time, dimensions. I mean, there's, I haven't even begun to talk about other dimensions and other lives, because it's all happening simultaneously right now, because right now is the only thing that exists. It's the past is a memory and the future is a projection. So it's, right now only ever exists, which is what dying really taught me, because I was experiencing everything simultaneously in that moment. Yeah, so really understanding that, and as well understanding that death is not the end. Death is the most blissful, incredible feeling that, heaven and hell is a human concept, and it's either heaven on earth or hell on earth, depending on what we're currently manifesting and experiencing. So, the other side of the veil is not at all what most people believe. And the fact that I can open the curtain and look behind the other side of the veil at any point. Yeah, and everything is consciousness. So the biggest thing I see that most people have an issue with is they fear death so much that they hold themselves back and they don't do things because they're afraid of death. When I skydived a couple of years ago, it was one of my greatest fears, and from that moment forward, it just allowed me to truly live instead of being scared. And even this, like, even this video is a prime example. Years ago, I wouldn't have been willing to say something like I've just mentioned, and it's everyone's allowed their own beliefs and their own perspectives, and that's their story. It's got nothing to do with me. That's, these are my beliefs from my experiences and my perspective as an understanding on the human experience. So it's, other people's opinion at the end of the day is irrelevant. It's what I choose to believe. So even if someone has the complete opposite opinion based on my experience, their opinion is irrelevant because I know what I've experienced. And, especially it's something that I noticed watching other people talking about having NDEs. And, that's the biggest struggle, is people don't understand what it is when you come back and then start sharing that experience. It's usually highly triggering for people. So, the more you understand why you believe what you believe by questioning everything, including your own questions and your own self, that's when you really find yourself. Because up until that point where you question everything, you're just a jumbled box of what everybody else wants, especially if you're still running people pleasing programs and trying to not rock the boat and share what your truth is, because at the end of the day, your truth's your truth and my truth's my truth, and everyone else's is everyone else's truth. It's, and people who choose to listen to my videos, they're using their free will to consume my content. So it's up to them whether they just listen or whether they question it them for themselves within their own experience. I'm literally just sharing my perspectives and my experiences. It's up to people what they believe, and come to their own conclusions and see what it feels like too. And as well, identifying if resistance comes up when I say different things, where that resistance comes from, because you usually identify the feeling with a story from the past with a limited belief or a different perspective. And that's the biggest reason that took me so long to get rid of the illnesses, because I refused to believe that it could be better than what it was. I could have just let it all go overnight and it would have gone. But I didn't believe within myself that I could do that. So that blocked myself from being able to do that. Whereas, now I know better, I can do better. So, like, just making a video and sharing it. And hopefully it helps. If it helps one person, that's all that matters. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that and have an awesome day.